Hi, this is Carrie, Christ-centered counselor and life coach with Promised Coaching. Today, I want to address resentment from narcissistic abuse and how resentments from what we've been through affect our lives after the abuse and when we're healing, and even after we feel that we've recovered from the abuse. That resentment can still reside in us. And I think it's really important to address because it can come out in areas of our lives that we really don't want it to, like other relationships internally. And it really is part of the healing process. And I don't think that we are ever fully healed in recovery from narcissistic abuse. I think it's a lifelong journey that things can come up in us or trigger us at any point in time in our lives where we are dealing with some of the remnants of it. So let's talk about resentment. I know for me personally, this is something that I've experienced post-healing, post feeling like I'm recovered from the major effects of the trauma. So let's take a look at how this can play out. For instance, you may start feeling more of a strained relationship with your family or with your church or someone that you looked up to that you might have felt misled you in a way for you to attract some kind of trauma into your life. Let's say your parents were narcissistic or your brother was narcissistic, or you were abused by one of your family members. You might end up feeling resentment towards them or whoever you feel might have led you down the wrong path in choosing someone or putting you in a situation with someone that harmed you. So the trust that you have with that person is now somewhat strained, and you're not really sure how to continue navigating that relationship. And it can be multiple relationships that have affected you in this way. It could be family, it could be friends, it could be your church, it could be a work or a group organization that you trusted, people that you'd known for years, and then you finally, in learning the truth about the abuse that you endured, you also learned where a lot of that had stemmed from. And so you now not only have resentments and this anger and this pain towards what you endured and the person that caused that pain and suffering for you, but also the people that are connected to that as well. And that can be a really difficult thing to move through, because now that you're feeling more healed and recovered and you're trying to move into healthier relationships, you're looking at this relationship or this one and going, okay, how do I navigate these that I feel are no longer benefiting me in a healthy way because I've learned the truth about these people and their behaviors and their patterns, and they're dysfunctional or they're very toxic, and you don't necessarily want to cut them out of your life, but you maybe need to set some boundaries with these people now that you've realized the connection there. So this is something so important for us to do. Being able to recognize that and have awareness of it, and then also being able to implement the appropriate boundaries in those relationships and with those people, so that way you're not being influenced or misled down the wrong path again, because that can easily happen when we've been in relationship with people who are close to us that have had such a large influence in our lives, whether it's a parent or a pastor or someone that we always really looked up to. And I think it's super important for us to put those boundaries that we need to in place, so that way we have a hedge of protection and safety around our emotional, our mental, and our physical well-being. That way we can work through those feelings of anger and resentment towards them, and kind of that bitterness that builds up in us from things that we learned from them, or things that were deceptive and manipulative. And I just want to say all those feelings are normal. It's completely normal, and I think healthy for us to feel some anger and resentment, but we don't want that festering in us long term, because that can affect our healthy relationships and friendships as well, and we don't want that to happen. So we need to deal with those feelings, and how we deal with those feelings is very important. We want to go to God with that. It's not so easy as to just saying, Lord, I just release this to you and give this to you, because there's going to be another situation that comes up where you're feeling this again and again and again. So it's not just one prayer that's going to take care of this, but that is definitely where you want to begin. You do want to begin in prayer, because God really is ultimately the spiritual healer that can resolve that in us. So we want to be not only in this prayer with Him initially, we want to be in consistent prayer with Him. The Word tells us to not cease from praying, never cease from praying. So continue to pray. And this is why, because the Lord wants us to be in constant connection with Him for these very real reasons, for these very real spiritual issues that we deal with as humanity as a whole, because humanity is fallen, right? We live in a very sinful, narcissistic world and culture. And so this is something that a lot of people go through, and a lot of people need to work through with the Lord. And so for my sisters in Christ, I want you to surround yourself with people who are safe, who validate the experiences that you've been through, who avoid any kind of victim shaming or blaming, because that's another thing. When we expose ourselves to people who do that, especially if you go back into the dating world and maybe you share your story with someone and you're vulnerable about it, and they somehow blame you or shame you for the choices that you made, to be in a narcissistic relationship, even though we know that doesn't happen. We don't choose to be in a relationship with someone who's harmful to us. We don't choose abuse. That is not your fault, and you are not to be shamed or blamed for that. So when we enter into dating relationships, this can happen because men just don't really understand, or maybe they're narcissistic themselves. They haven't had to endure this kind of narcissistic abuse from another woman. Whatever the situation is, there can be times where you might talk to someone who is unknowingly doing this. So you also want to make sure that you are not feeling like you need to submit to that in any way. You want to make sure that you can stand up for yourself. And that's why I always encourage women not to get back into the dating world until you feel that you are healed, recovered enough to be able to set those emotional boundaries for yourself, so that way you're not falling back into another narcissistic relationship or abusive relationship. So these are just very vital factors that you need to be aware of when you are going back into the dating world. Also, when you're developing new friendships with people, or maybe you want to get involved in a new church and they want to get to know you, and you start sharing your story in like a small group or a women's group, it's important to understand there are going to be people that you come in contact with that just unknowingly or narcissistically want to blame you or shame you for the abuse that you've been through. So it's so important to make sure that you are setting those parameters for yourself, because coming in contact with people that do that can build and grow that resentment in you and make it worse. So this is why I'm addressing this, and why it's so important for you to be aware of it and then make sure that you remove yourself from people or situations that are doing that, because they are in the wrong. And that is not going to help your healing or you resolving those leftover feelings and emotions that you really want God to deal with within you. And we know that spiritual warfare is very real, and the enemy will send people into your life to try and continue to have that resentment and bitterness fester in you, so that way he can keep you from God's will and plans and purposes for your life. So you want to have your eye focused on the kingdom of heaven. We know that the Lord is not a shaming Lord, especially for those that have been harmed by another person. He is our vindicator. He is our judge. He is our avenger, and he promises us that justice will be served for all those who have been hurt. So trust that and know that and believe in that, because anyone that tells you differently is not being supportive of your health. They're not being supportive of your growth, and they're not being supportive of your walk in Christ, because only God truly knows your situation and what you've been through. No one else is really in a place to have an opinion about you and your character or your identity in what you've been through. It does not define who you are. Only God can define who you are. You are the daughter of a king. You are an heir in Christ, and that's how you should have and should always be treated. I hope this was helpful, and if you have any experiences that you've been through or are in right now that you'd like to share in regards to resentment and connections with people, maybe it was your abuser or someone in connection with your abuser that you're trying to still navigate through, I would love to hear from you. Please leave it in the comments. And if you like this video, please hit like, subscribe to this channel, and take care.